Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It is Monday, November 17th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, this federal contractor is reinventing itself by shifting from services to solutions. Plus, what does it really take to reopen the government after a shutdown? Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. The Trump administration is looking to hire thousands of federal law enforcement personnel as part of expanded immigration enforcement efforts. But the courts handling these cases aren't seeing the same surge in resources. Several immigration judges recently fired by the Justice Department say the court system is losing staff and it's unable to address a multi-million case backlog. Federal News Network's Jory Heckman is here with more details. Jory, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Terry. Great to be here.
Give us a background on what the Trump administration has done to staff up immigration enforcement this year.
Yeah, so one of the big signature pieces of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that we saw this summer is that it gives the Department of Homeland Security a lot of money, billions of dollars, to beef up immigration enforcement. That translates into about 10,000 new immigration and customs enforcement agents, as well as 5,000 customs officers and 3,000 Border Patrol agents, a real surge in the personnel handling this work.
The immigration courts couldn't keep up with the workload they had before that surge in enforcement. So has the administration done anything to help immigration judges keep up now?
So that same piece of legislation, it gives a much more modest plus up to immigration judges. They would get about 100% new immigration judges under that legislation, as opposed to a couple of thousand for everyone else. That would bring their total head count to about 800 immigration judges nationwide. But what we've heard from some of the unions representing those immigration judges, the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers and its affiliate, the National Association of Immigration Judges, they say despite those added resources in the bill, the number of immigration judges has actually been dwindling. It started about 700 at the beginning of this year. It's closer to 600 now. And that is a product of the Trump administration firing about 80 immigration judges since the start of this administration, and others have retired or accepted voluntary separation incentives.
Folks with that background don't just grow on trees. They're not on every street corner waiting to become an immigration judge. What are the former judges saying about how the courts and the system is working?
So we heard from a number of these former immigration judges at an event at the National Press Club last week. One of them, Ted Doolittle, he was up until recently an immigration judge at the court in Hartford, Connecticut. At the time, just before he was terminated, he was one of two judges handling a caseload of about 46,000 cases. The day that he got his termination email, it was unexpected. It came at around 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and he was preparing for the next day's docket, where he was going to hear from 57 defendants. Those are, of course, cases that got reassigned to other judges because he no longer had a job. Doolittle said that for the immigration courts to meaningfully address this backlog that they're looking at, they would need about 2,000 to 3,000 immigration judges, not a couple hundred.
So the caseload is crushing. I think it's probably one of the most overburdened court systems, state, municipal, or federal, in the United States.
And that is Ted Doolittle. He's a former immigration judge.
Jory, what impact has the short staffing had on the processing of these cases? If one judge was handling 46,000 cases, must be a pretty long wait.
Yeah, I mean, this is a case where these former judges say that justice delayed is justice denied. They are collectively looking at a backlog of about 3.4 million cases that still need to be processed through these courts. The staffing is not there to get these dockets handled quickly, and that this is a really complex system. One other former immigration judge said that this is a docket where they can be juggling 5 different languages, where they need to get interpreter services aligned, make sure that there's someone there that can adequately represent these defendants, can make sure that they understand the charges that they're facing and the consequences that they're facing. And when you have immigration judges be fired in some cases, that just shifts more of the burden on judges who are overwhelmed, they are understaffed, and they are having a harder time to process all of the cases before them. To further complicate things, they are concerned that there's an uptick in no-shows for court dates because defendants are afraid to show up for fear that they may be detained by ICE agents afterwards. That is something that immigration judges say has been a pretty commonplace function so far this year.
Well, certainly the immigration process is a high priority for the Trump administration. These cases are high stakes, high profile. What's their strategy to bring in more immigration judges to handle the backlog?
One of the stopgap solutions they're taking here is that the Justice Department is allowing hundreds of military lawyers to temporarily serve as immigration judges. We did hear from Matt Biggs, who represents the IFPTE. He's their president, and he says that no disrespect to those JAG officers, but they don't have the background in immigration law, and you need that to really understand these complex cases and actually be able to address this backlog.
Just to be qualified to even apply for the job, immigration judges had to have 7 years of experience in administrative or immigration law. And now we're replacing, with all due respect to the JAG lawyers, we appreciate their service to our nation. No disrespect to them, but they should not be in these positions.
So that training strategy has got to take some time to even get these folks up to speed to be able to function. Do we have an estimate on the timeline?
No timeline really at this point. One other thing immigration judges brought up is that the senior immigration judges, they typically served in a mentorship role for the younger immigration judges, and a lot of them have left. A lot of them took those voluntary separation incentives, and so the ability for the new judges to train up, to understand, to learn the ropes, so to speak, learn on the job to some extent, that function is no longer around for them. So even if there's the possibility of more judges being brought on board, their productivity, their ability to meaningfully chip away this backlog, that's going to be reduced, according to some of the concerns as expressed by some of these former immigration judges.
Jory, did they give you a look at the future? Where do they expect this transition to wind up?
The future is really uncertain for a lot of these former judges. They understand that there's an uptick in the caseload here, that the enforcement side of the operations are full steam ahead, that there are more cases going through this system than there has in the past, but that there's just very few resources going into the processing of these cases, that judges just really feel understaffed, outgunned by the caseload before them. It seems like a very uncertain future for them.
That's Federal News Network's Jory Heckman. Jory, thanks for bringing us this story.
Thanks, Terry.
You can find the full story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Still to come, what does it really take to reopen the federal government after a shutdown? This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. From back pay delays to contractor backlogs, agencies face a cascade of challenges as they restart operations. Bill Hoagland, Senior Vice President at the Bipartisan Policy Center, has seen shutdowns and recoveries before. He's here to explain what it takes to restore continuity and prepare for the next funding deadline. Bill, thank you so much for joining me.
It's happy to join you, Terry.
You've seen many shutdowns in your long career. Here we are a couple of days into restart. Let's start with some of the impacts on people as agencies get up and running. Some people got maybe their first back pay checks over the weekend. Others will be seeing them promised early this week, but they're not going to be complete. What should agencies and people be thinking about as we go through the logistics of making folks whole in back pay?
Well, I think it's important for the HR departments of the various agencies. They're going to have a lot of work on their hands to make sure that they get the pay back get everybody back up to where they were. And as you say, Terry, I think they hopefully most of them had received the pay that they were due over the weekend because the law that was adopted said as quickly and as soon as this has become law, you're to get the back pay. So all I can say is that the HR departments will be working very hard to make sure that that happens. And then, of course, they're going to be faced with the next payday. So there's going to be a lot of work for the HR departments here. And when they come back, get fully staffed too.
And it's really kind of complicated to compute that back pay. So folks who were affected need to make sure that they're checking their own paychecks, right?
Absolutely. I think that's a very, very important point, Terry. I think absolutely they need to check to make sure that, because there could be some glitches in this, given the way this has to go fast. HR departments are supposed to move fast to get the pay back. So you're right. There could be some mistakes, and so the federal worker needs to make sure and check what their previous paychecks were against what they're getting to make sure they are getting what they have been promised.
Well, you talk about workload for the HR teams. Many of them are much smaller than they were because a lot of HR folks have been downsized or took the DRP. But there's a piece in this law that's really important. It says reverse the rifts that happened during shutdown. How is that going to play out?
Well, since we've never had this happen before in a shutdown, this is going to be new. And therefore, again, we're going to have some new complications here for the HR departments to figure this out. My hope is that it's a simple flipping of the switch, so to speak. I hope that the HR department, they know who they riffed. They simply have to turn that off and of course, notify the people that they are still fully employed.
And one more thing in the HR space is the processing of a retirement backlog. September 30th, the day before the shutdown, was the deadline for the deferred resignation program. HR teams could come back to find stacks of retirement processing on their desks.
Absolutely. As you've outlined it here and we discussed, there is going to be a lot of activity for the HR departments and how they prioritize what to address first. I think they will have to address quickly the pay issue. They will have to quickly address the RIFs issue. And then I would assume that in terms of the retirement programs and people that had put in for retirement or were going to retire, that may take a back seat a little bit to those other priorities the HR department will be facing during that period of time.
Well, I started with people because they're the foundation of everything that's going to happen in the federal government. But now put yourself in the position of one of the department or agency leaders. You've just got your organization started back up. What are your operational priorities? What do you think about getting back up to speed first?
Well, I think if I was running an agency, first of all, it would depend upon the agency. Let's be clear. Some of the agencies, such as Department of Agriculture, the military construction accounts, those are full year funded now. They will be basically going back to their full year plans in terms of implementation. It's for those other agencies, those other 12, so 9 appropriation bills that are just operational now until the end of January. They're going to have to look very carefully. They have received, as I understand, on the day before the shutdown, there was a memorandum that was put out by Russ Volt at OMB that laid out the appropriation apportionment process. And so those agencies are going to have to look very carefully at that directive, that OMB memo, in terms of the implementation of their accounts and moving forward. But in terms of agency priorities, I think the most important thing, again, is to make sure that those individuals that had been RIFed are put back onto the payroll quickly and working with them individual programs. The problem here is for the agencies that are only receiving a continuing resolution through the end of January is planning. If they had planned new programs, new activities, technically they're on hold again. And so they'll have to go back to as the term implies, just a continuation of their activities that were in place at the end of the last fiscal year.
I'm speaking with Bill Hoagland. He's a senior vice president at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Well, Bill, speaking of continuing, what about the impact on contracts and contractors? I mean, there was so much disruption leading up to the end of the fiscal year, and then they went into a shutdown. If you're still under a CR, how do you get your contracts and contractors back up and running?
Terry, that's a question I probably had better avoid trying to answer exactly because I think there's some legal questions here. Technically, first of all, the contractors, many of them did not get paid, and there's the question whether they will get paid. They're not federal workers, they're on contract. And so I think, as you've outlined it here, there's going to be some issues associated with how those contractors reestablish their relationship with the agency heads. Do they have to enter into new contracts? That would be terrible. I would assume that a continuing resolution would allow those contractors. I hope the contracts were written in such a way that they automatically come back into play. But again, that will depend upon the way the contracts were entered into prior to the shutdown.
Does a continuing resolution provide that agencies can make penalty payments if they're overdue in settling some of these invoices?
I think the answer there again, Terry, is dependent upon the way the contracts were written at the time the individuals came into that the agency entered into it. I think it will depend. Is the best answer I could give to that question.
Thank you. Well, we've been talking here about federal agencies, but Congress has got to get back to work too. The House at least has been away for a while. What's the backlog looking like as Congress tries to get itself restarted?
Well, this is going to be a difficult period between now and through the end of January with the holiday season coming up, a Thanksgiving recess, the traditional recesses around the first of the year with the holiday season there. There's not a lot of time. Congress does have at least the Appropriation Committee chairwomen in the Senate plan very strongly to try to get as many of the regular appropriation bills done as possible. And so we can expect another, a packaging of some of the we'll call them many appropriation packages in terms of putting maybe defense and another health and human services into one package and try to get that through. I do know that the hope is next week that the Senate does want to put a package together that includes defense, Homeland Security, I think, as well as health and human services. Those are big bills. And so the pressure will be mounting here. But to your point, it's not a lot of time here. And the bigger the bill, the more controversy the bill. And
the more ornaments on that Christmas tree.
That's true. And so as a consequence, I'm gloom and doomer a little bit on this, and I'm sorry to it. I don't want to just coming off this the longest shutdown in our history. There's a real chance, a real probability that we'll have have to have another continuing resolution come the end of January, simply because of the backlog. And of course, there are other things. Defense reauthorization bill is up. They're trying to get that done. So it's Congress has got, because of the House has been out. We also have the Jeffrey Epstein issue coming up, which is going to cause some problems in terms of delays further. It's going to be a full agenda between now and the end of January, which, as I say, has unfortunately probability of another continuing resolution.
Bill, you've given us a hard reality pill there, but if you could make some recommendations about reforms that might help us avoid shutdowns in the future, or maybe get appropriations out on time, what would you say is at the top of that list?
Well, as a former Senate Budget Committee staff director for many, many years, the first thing is just to pass a budget and pass it on time. As you know, we really didn't get a budget from the president for the fiscal year that we're in. We had a mini kind of budget for the appropriation committee, but we never got a budget. And so Congress has not adopted a budget. In fact, over the 50-year history of the Budget Act, I think about 13 or 14 times we've not got budget resolutions put in place in time. So the first thing is, just basics, is get a budget put together and meet that time frame early. That sets if you're following the schedule, you would have your budget put in place by April the 5th, tax filing day, before the beginning of the upcoming fiscal year. That would give time for the appropriators to move and get their individual appropriation bills done. So that's just basic. Number two, while you're not always going to make it, even with a budget resolution on time, as we know. And therefore, I would also argue that maybe an automatic continuing resolution, something that I've argued for many, many years. Nobody wins in shutdowns. I'm sorry. It's not Republic. It's not Democrat. Not the American public lose. And so my argument would be have an automatic CR. Don't go through the shutdown aspect, but just automatically continuation of appropriations. And if you want to put pressure on, maybe you knock after so many days on that continuing resolution, automatic knock down the appropriations by a percentage point or two to keep the pressure on them to get it done. And then finally, longer term, I'm a strong believer in biennial budgeting as opposed to annual budgeting, which would be another approach. Would you end up after 2 years also end up with a continuing? Maybe, but at least you'd work it out. You'd have more time to work out your budget and your appropriations over a 2-year period.
I've been speaking with Bill Hoagland. He's Senior Vice President at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Bill, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Terry. I appreciate it.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, the lessons lawmakers took from the shutdown and what they have to do before funding runs out again on January 30th. But first, this federal contractor is reinventing itself by shifting from services to solutions. You're listening to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. ERT's legacy in space and earth science is evolving under CEO Mark Lee. His strategy blends innovation, infrastructure, and collaboration to position the company for complex federal projects. Lee shares how ERT is scaling without compromising the mission in this episode of Government Contractors to Watch, sponsored by J.P. Morgan Chase. Mark, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
ERT works on, I guess, some of the most complex space and earth science missions. Tell us about maybe one breakthrough that's really changed the game for how you support your defense clients.
You know, it's actually a variety of defense and civilian clients, but a lot of what we have been focused on is this pivot to more focused on solutions. And, a lot of the business that we work in, services has been sort of the name of the game, and that's sort of, at this point, has connotations of just, people in seats, just sort of staff augmentation. And there's been a shift that's happening in the industry, really shifting to more of a solution focus. And that's really driven how we're thinking about driving innovation. We've been reworking a lot of the processes in the company to be around a solution orientation. So making sure that when we're thinking about what tools make sense to bring to a problem, everybody's talking about AI and machine learning and all these things. Those are extremely valuable tools and still sort of maturing and coming into their own. We're really starting with the customer's needs first, because I think there's a risk of, sort of the tail wagging the dog. You see this set of tools and you want to apply it everywhere you can, and we really want to come at it the other way. Like, what are our clients' problems? What tools are the most appropriate to those problems? And that's really led us, into addition to thinking about, artificial intelligence, a lot around digital engineering, because in the areas that we work in, there's all these applications, and by applying some of those principles, you can accelerate how quickly things can be done. You don't have to wait. In the old days, they would build like 2 copies of a satellite so they could use one to test and one to launch. Well, you can now do that within a computer, and that extends to the whole IT systems that support the satellites and all that. So that's really a place that we've been leaning in a much bigger way, and I think it really flowed directly from this focus on really our clients' problems and focus on what solutions to those problems will be most appropriate.
As you think about and build out that solutions approach, is there a particular move that's helped you achieve scale without losing your technical edge or your mission focus?
Coming into a company, when I joined ERT, I had been around for around 30 years, founder-owned, founder-led, and we had investment from Macquarie Capital, and that was when they brought me in. And, we had a great team already at ERT, but I also had the opportunity to bring in a few leaders. And to me, building for scale is all about having the right people in the right seats, and making sure that the new people understood the role, the existing people sort of knew where we were wanting to head, and then building out processes. I'd been at a much larger company and kind of seen how they operate. well, all right, well, what can I do to get ERT ready for that kind of scale? So, it's building in new business development processes, new operational processes, those types of things. That's really been what we've been doing to sort of build, so that you kind of want to build the infrastructure for where you want to be, because if you get there and you don't have it, then that's where that's when delivery can suffer, and you put a lot of pressure on your staff to sort of make the impossible happen. And there's only so many times you can go back to that well.
You talked about having the right people in the right seats. Yeah. Your work requires some seriously specialized talent, and often those folks need security clearances. What's your strategy for finding and keeping those right people?
I think some of it is my leadership style is a certain type of person that I want to have, and it's really finding the right people for the organization. I am not a command and control leader, which it sounds great, all that, but there's actually different implications of that, where if there are folks that are expecting to be told, all right, here are the next 5 things exactly that you need to do, that's not the way it's going to happen. I will more lay out what's the output, what's the result that we need, and you're a professional, you sort of figure out how we'll get that done. So making sure that's clearly communicated, and you're hiring the people that are going to want to do that. Now, the people that like that kind of management style are really drawn to that, and I really try to be super approachable, and I think when that drives the culture. And we have these town halls that we do, I think, once a quarter. And I want staff to ask anything. I said, no, don't give me any questions ahead of time. No prepared remarks. And the harder the question, the better. And I've learned over time that type of approach, when you're willing to be vulnerable and, actually sometimes I'm not really sure, and being able to say that you might not have the answer, or it may be a question that is a little bit sensitive. Watching me navigate that, I have found the staff trust you more, and you build a culture that really, they're telling their friends, hey, look, you should look at this opening, and that's certainly where we always want to start is referrals. But you also have to be doing really cool work. And if you're seen as a commoditized player, then folks are the top talent are a little less excited. So I think some of it also is about the work that we pursue. You want to pursue the type of work that will attract the staff that you really want to have.
So let's follow up on that, because you're in a space where you have a lot of competition. So beyond your culture and your people and the type of work that you do, what really makes ERT stand out to your clients?
Our competition tends to fall into 2 big buckets, I kind of see. There's the much larger multi-billion-dollar firms that we go up against, and then there's companies that are more our size or even smaller. And I think we try to do the sort of the best of both worlds approach. I think relative to the bigger companies, we offer more customer intimacy. We can offer more flexibility, and a little bit more ability to adapt quickly, because we don't have this big, huge infrastructure that has to adapt with the customer. So I think that gives us some advantages. I think relative to companies that are our size or maybe smaller, we've got a lot of executives that had been at big places and been successful at big places, and we've got the backing of a really good private equity firm. We've got a great banking group led by JP Morgan, so that we can be much more able to respond to big challenges. They've got this huge project that they want to launch. They can have a little more faith that we can pull it off, given kind of the leadership we have and the kind of backing that we have. And I think trying to find that balance. I'll come back to solutions. That really plays a key role. If you can be flexible and you have the client intimacy, but then you also have the heft behind it, you can really drive some outstanding results. And I think given where we are, that's really where the team is really aimed at.
So those are 3 really important topics: the relationship, your own team, and then the solutions-based approach. So tell us more about how you bring those 3 threads together to really deliver modernization of technology or the solutions that matter for your clients, and you still help them stay compliant and secure.
Yeah, I think I see, technology as a key to making those things happen. I think some people think about all this technology, the modernization, it creates risk. Well, the risk is staying, is trying to keep doing things the way you've always done it. So part of what we've tried to do is to build teams that are encouraged and actually incentivized to constantly sort of push the envelope. We've got a innovation team where, look, their whole job is figure out what are the newest tools that are out there, how can they be applied to our clients' problems, and then what are the implications of applying them? Are there other risks? Does it create cyber concerns? Does it address cyber concerns? How scalable is it? Does it have, is it going to lock us in or lock our client into a single vendor? So we've really had, and those folks are not sort of bogged down in the day-to-day client, so they can sort of be a little bit more creative and focus. But at the same time, and we joke about it all the time, is that we don't do science fair experiments here. So they know that whatever they're working on has to be practical, has to be applicable, and has to be really client-driven. And we've worked really hard to build a really close connection between that solutions team and our business development team so that all the things that they're doing are being informed by what we're seeing in the market, what things we're chasing, so that then we're arming our business development team with really great solutions that just put them in a much more competitive position to win the work.
And as you look ahead, say 5 years, how do you see your competition space changing, and how are you preparing ERT to meet those challenges?
Well, I think there's two different sides. I think on the overall federal landscape, I think you're already seeing it happen, that this shift from people talking about services to talking about solutions. We're not the only ones thinking that way. And with the government talking about rewriting the FAR, I think there will be some incentives in that, in terms of less of the cost-based pricing and more of fixed price, things like that, which provide the contractors an incentive to drive innovation. So I think you'll see that happening. Within the space market, we couldn't be more excited about all that's happening there. I think it will be much larger. You'll continue to have the big folks that have been there a long time. I think they're sort of almost an extension of the government in a lot of ways. They're critical to how things happen. But I think there's going to be some non-traditional players that are going to come in. Within the civilian space, you're seeing a big push to commercialization, using more commercial services. And I think that opens the door to new entrants. We're looking at those as really good teaming partners. And I think part of what makes ERT special as well is that we're all about the best solution for our customer. Sometimes we can do that all ourselves, but sometimes there's somebody that does a part of that better than us. And we're not going to undermine our customer by trying to do the things that we're not great at. We're going to go bring in the best in breed. And being able to bring in some of these non-traditionals puts us in a much more competitive position, but it also is really fun because they're doing some really interesting stuff. And I think you'll see more of that over the next 5 years.
Lots of opportunities ahead then.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mark Lee is CEO of ERT, and this has been Government Contractors to Watch, sponsored by J.P. Morgan Chase. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search J.P. Morgan Chase. Still to come, the lessons lawmakers took from the shutdown and what they have to do before funding runs out again on January 30th. This is The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. After weeks of gridlock, the government is open, but scars from the shutdown remain and the clock is ticking toward January 30th. Lawmakers face a packed agenda, from appropriations bills to hearings and a healthcare vote, with little room to avoid another shutdown showdown. Here with the outlook is Mitchell Miller, Capitol Hill correspondent for WTOP. Mitchell, thanks for joining me.
Absolutely.
We're all relieved that the government shutdown is over, but I'm really interested in your perspective. You watched it unfold on the Hill for the last 7 weeks. What are your takeaways from the discussions and ultimately the resolution?
Well, I think, first of all, not surprisingly, everybody agrees that a shutdown is just bad all the way around, with all the impacts that we've seen everywhere, with hundreds of thousands of federal workers not getting paid, the delays at the airports, the SNAP issue with people not getting their benefits. So on that, we all agree. Now, what do the parties agree on elsewhere? Nothing, really. I do think from my personal standpoint, having seen these shutdowns before, I think we really know for a fact now that the agitating party, whichever it is, Republican or Democrat, is always going to fall short of what its ultimate goal was. So, for example, if you go back to 2013 when Republicans were trying to get rid of Affordable Care Act, they didn't quite get there, and they eventually didn't get what they wanted. This time around, Democrats got a lot of the things that they wanted in terms of raising the profile of health care and all the issues related to the Affordable Care Act and extending those subsidies. They also got some political boost, of course, from people who didn't think they fought hard enough the last time. But ultimately, they didn't get exactly what they wanted, which was a guarantee that these subsidies would be extended. So while it can be a somewhat effective way of getting political leverage, it's obviously the most inefficient way possible to do this. How you sort out whether there are winners or losers here, I think just depends on your political point of view, whether you think Democrats got enough victories to make it worthwhile, whether you are on the more liberal end of the Democratic Party and you think that it was a cave-in and that it's another bad indicator that the leadership of the Democratic Party doesn't go far enough. And then on the Republican side, they say, hey, look, we held firm, we had a continuing resolution, and we did what we had to do. So really there are no particular winners, I think, when you have a government shutdown.
Oh, that's a really helpful perspective. One of the threads that kind of kept coming through the whole period was the White House's various comments on the federal workforce. Would they pay them? Would they not pay them? Would they hold them? Would they fire them? The CR really reaffirms what everybody kind of thought was the rule, that regardless of whether you're furloughed or accepted, you get your back pay. And it reverses the rifts. Do you think this is the beginning, maybe, of Congress taking a more supportive view of the federal workforce, a more engaged perspective?
I think so. And here's an interesting kind of inside look at that. I spoke with Virginia Senator Tim Kaine, who, of course, was one of the Democratic lawmakers who went along with the new CR in the Senate to get it to the final finish point with the House last week. And what he said was, they really hadn't addressed the federal equation with the employees when he jumped into the negotiations. They had talked about appropriations, they had talked about health care issues, but they hadn't specifically addressed whether or not federal workers were going to, number one, get back pay, or also whether these RIFs would be rescinded and whether there would be guarantees in the future. And so he pushed very hard for all of those three things. And in his view, that was the most important reason why he ultimately became the deciding vote and got them to the 60 votes to break the filibuster. So I think the fact that the White House was willing to give in a little bit, and as you well know, they have not for many, many months, I think this does suggest that there is a little bit more wiggle room than there used to be, and that there is a shift where members of Congress are now taking a little bit more of an assertive role.
Well, that might be a little bit of a silver lining. I guess the other question I wanted to ask you was, people expected there would be some pressure points that would work to motivate members of Congress to reach a deal, air traffic control, SNAP, health care. What's your take on which of those was ultimately most effective?
Well, it's interesting because it's almost like deja vu all over again, as Yogi Berra once infamously said. When you went back to the longest prior shutdown, the one in 2018 and 2019, what was it that ultimately ended it? It was the aviation issues, the flight delays, the cancellations, and all these other pressure points that we talked about where there were certain dates and deadlines, and the fact that the open enrollment in connection with the ACA was coming. Those, they had various impacts, but I think ultimately it really was the whole issue related to the aviation system. And I think when I talk to people who, for example, think that the Democrats really caved, a lot of other Democrats who don't think that they caved point out that the goodwill that they had politically with the wins at their back, with these elections that recently happened in Virginia and New Jersey, would be quickly wiped out as we got closer to Thanksgiving, because obviously these air issues were only going to get worse. And so I think that was really the biggest pressure point.
I'm speaking with Mitchell Miller. He's the Capitol Hill correspondent for WTOP. All right, Mitchell, well, now they're back, and we have at least a temporary reprieve until the end of January. What's on the legislative agenda for the upcoming couple of months?
Well, one of the small victories, of course, was the omnibus that they passed within the continuing resolution. So they had three appropriations packages that got passed. The bad news about that is those are kind of the low-hanging legislative fruit. You have agriculture, the legislative branch, military construction. These are the things that generally both sides agree on. And I think what we now have is we have these 9 other appropriations bills that need to get passed. And there is so little trust within the Congress right now between both sides, even among appropriators, that it's going to be very, very difficult for them to get all of those through regular order, even though Senate Majority Leader John Thune has repeatedly said that's what he wants to do. I think they will grind away at some of those, and they may make some progress there. But ultimately, we may again be pushing up against that January 30th extension of the federal funding deadlines, which actually goes back to the levels under the Biden administration, believe it or not.
That will be quite a challenge. And Speaker Johnson has said that the House members are catching up on backlogged hearings, right?
Right. They have a huge backlog in the House. I mean, they were gone for the longest period that is not a regularly scheduled either summer or holiday recess ever. So the fact that they were gone since September 19th means they have lots of oversight hearings scheduled. They have lots of appropriations hearings scheduled. They have to just get back to the legislating that they were originally planning to do. And so that was why they scheduled to get back into action this week, because they have such a backlog.
And one of the big hearings that comes out of the CR resolution is the hearing or the bill on health care premiums, right?
Right. So that will be the big question. How does Senate Majority Leader John Thune schedule this? Because there are all, as you know, a lot of now new Republican proposals that have come about because of this whole struggle related to health care. A lot of people are talking about reforms to the Affordable Care Act, putting caps on them, doing various things that they believe will cut out waste out of the ACA. So that's going to be a moving target, I think, about when that vote will actually take place and what it will include. Will there be separate Republican proposals? I suspect there will. Will there be a variety of amendments? And then let's just say, even if in the unlikely event that they do get to a vote where they approve extension of these subsidies, then, of course, it would have to go to the House. There have been no promises made by House Speaker Mike Johnson that he will hold a vote on this. He said he's just leaving it as a clean slate and essentially saying, I'm going to wait for what the Senate does. So a lot of unanswered questions in that category, too.
Well, with the holiday schedule, there aren't a lot of work days for Congress between now and January 30th. Do you think they'll be able to get all of it done?
I really don't. I think that we are looking again at probably another kind of a showdown as we get to January 30th, because I just don't think that they're going to have enough time to get through all of these things that they need to do. And then there's still a lot of feelings of just frustration related to the shutdown. And one of the things that's come about related to that is there's a hearing this week on Wednesday. The subcommittee of the Commerce Committee on Aviation is going to look at those issues related to air safety, the delays, the cancellations, what can be done to make sure that air traffic controllers and other key federal employees involved in aviation are paid while this all goes on, because a lot of lawmakers are really concerned about that. So that panel is going to hear from the head of the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, Nick Daniels, as well as others involved in aviation.
Certainly a lot to watch. I've been speaking with Mitchell Miller, the Capitol Hill correspondent for WTOP. Mitchell, thanks for joining me.
You bet.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. As Congress works to finalize the fiscal 2026 defense policy bill, Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren is calling out a leading industry group for trying to block bipartisan right-to-repair efforts that would give soldiers the ability to fix their own equipment. Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis is here to help us sort it out. Anastasia, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Terry.
Refresh us on this right-to-repair push. What's behind it?
Yeah, so the military services have long struggled with contract-imposed restrictions on how they can repair and maintain their own equipment. Too often, they're dependent on original manufacturers to come in and fix whatever is broken. And that usually takes a long time, and it usually costs a lot of money. So the Army actually has recently been leading the way on this issue since they announced their Army Transformation Initiative. And as part of that transformation, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth directed the Army to incorporate right to repair provisions in all new and existing contracts. That's an undertaking, and especially incorporating it into existing contracts. But Army Secretary Dan Driscoll has been very vocal about the challenges that soldiers face when it comes to repairing their own equipment. So, for example, at AUSA in October, he talked about Lockheed-owned Black Hawk helicopter to illustrate how contractor restrictions drive up the costs. So he said the manufacturer refuses to repair or replace a small screen control knob, and when it breaks, it grounds the aircraft. That forces the Army to purchase an entire new screen, and that costs $47,000. And he said that the Army could make that knob for $15. So the right to repair efforts and reforms have been gaining a lot of momentum and bipartisan support from Congress. There were some efforts last year. They failed. But this year, both the Senate and the House have their provisions in their versions of the 2026 NDAA.
So Senator Warren is calling out the National Defense Industrial Association specifically here. What is their position and why is she concerned?
Yeah, well, she argues that NDAA's opposition is rooted in protecting contractor profits and kind of not genuine concerns about innovation, which is how NDAA frames it. The industry group published a white paper recently. It's called Protecting DoD's Access to Innovation. And in it, they criticize the proposals from the House and the Senate. Warren says that the organization's opposition is, and I quote, dangerous and misguided attempt to protect an unacceptable status quo of giant contractor profiteering. She says that the organization is attacking these reforms with vague and threatening claims that don't really stand up to scrutiny.
Isn't right to repair part of the acquisition reforms that Hegseth announced a couple of weeks ago that reflect what Congress has drafted in the NDAA?
It's something that is in the Army Transformation Initiative, and the things that the House and the Senate are proposing are a little bit different. They're kind of approaching it from different angles, but it's kind of attacking the same issue.
And so what is NDIA's complaint? What are they worried about?
They say, so the Senate wants contractors to have instructions for continued operation readiness. So the Senate wants contractors to provide DoD with instructions for continued operational readiness. That would include things like data, tools, and software for operations, maintenance, installation, and training. And basically, NDIA says that could include sensitive data and IP it could include sensitive data and proprietary technical information. They're saying that this proposal would allow DoD to provide those parts, tools, and information to any authorized third party, and that third party could be the company's direct competitor. So basically, NDAA is saying this will hamper innovation, and as a consequence, companies will not want to do business with DoD because of those concerns of IP disclosure. Warren says that the complete opposite is true. Small businesses have come out and said that the right to repair law would create new business opportunities. Multiple associations have endorsed the reforms, saying that this would actually foster innovation because currently big defense contractors have vendor-locked several DoD programs and kind of have monopolized the market of sustainment. And so Warren is kind of saying that the argument that this would deter companies from working with DoD is not supported in reality. And I quote, it's a late in the game effort meant to confuse and scare members of Congress and muddy the terms of the debate.
NDIA represents a big chunk of the defense industry sector. What are folks outside the NDIA wall saying about the back and forth between them and Congress?
Yeah, they're saying this is kind of the latest iteration of a decades-long debate. The government has historically demanded more access to data than it needed. Industry has been zealously protecting its IP and tech data rights, so there's a lot of mistrust between the two parties. Someone who spoke with the Senate staff said they don't agree with NDIA's characterization because it's almost kind of dealing with perception here. But ultimately, the concerns from NDIA and more broadly, conditions for access should be addressed from the very start instead of addressing them when there is a crisis.
So, Anastasia, is it the expectation that this will sort of get resolved as the National Defense Authorization Bill gets conferenced and passed in Congress?
Yeah, we'll see what they come up with. But I think there is a lot of support for what the House and the Senate are proposing.
Well, there's much to watch there. That's Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis. Anastasia, thanks for bringing us the story.
Thank you, Terry.
You can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editors are Daisy Thornton and Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.